Every vegetarian has exceptions. Maybe you're partial to a kebab at 4 AM on a Friday, or perhaps you eat fish if you're in another country. But my exception is meaty normals. It's probably the first advanced technique most fighting game players learn, and it's core to just about every title, but I know there are a couple of you in here that don't play, so let's break it down in the quickest way possible. A meaty normal is a normal attack that connects with the opponent on the first frame possible after standing up. Its surface level purpose is very defined. Due to it hitting them as early as possible, they are unable to do any kind of attack that isn't an invulnerable reversal like a Shoryuken or a super. Of course, this is a very general understanding. Different games have different answers to meaties, but these are the most common. Any technique that limits the opponent's options is obviously a strong thing to do in fighters, but its nuance doesn't stop there. So let's get into the meat and bones of what is possible. To understand this fully, we have to briefly talk about frame advantage. In Street Fighter 4, Ryu's crouching medium kick is 0 on hit, meaning that when it hits you, no one is at an advantage. So if both players were to press the exact same button after this, they would trade attacks. That hit advantage, 0, is calculated with the assumption that this crouch medium kick hits on the first frame it physically can after startup. However, that first frame is not the only frame it can hit on. This move has 5 active frames. These 5 frames are the window where the attack can connect with the opponent. What is interesting is what happens when we hit on these later frames. The amount of block stun or hit stun a move produces is a fixed number no matter what active frame you hit it on, but because you're connecting later and thus recovering quicker, you will get more frame advantage. So if we hit this move on the last possible active frame, instead of being 0 on hit, it becomes +4 on hit, meaning we can combo into another normal attack. But how does this happen? Well, naturally it only really comes from an opponent walking into an attack that's already out, but you can't really react to this. However, we can manufacture this situation through meaties. Because the opponent isn't hittable until they're stood up, if we time an attack so the last active frame aligns with the first hittable frame, we get this extra advantage that can unlock combo routes and pressure strings which would be entirely inaccessible in normal circumstances. With this technique, we can hugely alter the risk reward on moves that didn't really see much airtime. Yun's overhead was a great example of this. A decent move that hopped over lows but didn't really do much beyond finishing rounds as a final tick of damage. But make it as meaty as possible and suddenly instead of being +2 on hit, it's +5, giving you a full combo afterwards, changing this annoying scratch into a genuinely powerful threat. A big part of the reason this is an interesting technique is the way in which we craft these situations where meaties are usable. After a hard knockdown in pre-Ultra Street Fighter 4, there was a fixed amount of frames until the opponent stood up, meaning it was perfectly possible to land a meaty every single time. The way in which we did this was frame kills. Take this example. I want to land Makoto's stand hard kick during the last possible active frame. After a throw knockdown, it takes the opponent 56 frames to stand and be hittable. So what I can do here is whiff certain buttons, in this case crouching light kick and a held forward hard kick, which perfectly sets me up with the correct timing to hit meaty and connect my far more damaging combo. I am very aware of how tryhard this is, but god, I loved pouring hours into frame data in this game, figuring out what moves would benefit from being hit meaty and how to set them up. It was this weird alchemy that if you look at my previous videos from nearly 10 years ago, you can see clearly captured my imagination in a big way. Frame kills are not the only means for people to implement this technique though. Some people time their meaties manually, making them far harder to see and act accordingly against. There are countless examples of people doing this, but it's pretty hard, and the fewer active frames a move has, the harder it gets, but when you land it, it's super hype. In my local Xrd scene, we had a player called Robo, who was sick, but the main thing that stood out when fighting him was his Meaties. He was an Axel main and he would consistently hit you with a meaty 6H into a full combo. 6H has 9 active frames, but you have to hit so late to get a combo, let alone real damage. In any other game this would be pretty hard, but Xrd has variable wake up timing where every character gets up at a different point. He accounted for this manually. I get that this is a complete tangent, but Jesus Christ, that shit was amazing, and he's a sick player, and I really needed to point that out to you. But back to the video. As I mentioned, invulnerable reversals remain the most common way to beat these meaty attacks, but sometimes even they can lose with the right setup and right button. The ways in which people have worked around reversals over the years range from the brilliant to the ridiculous, so let's look at some examples. One very common method is low profiling. We see this most often versus characters like Kai, whose DP doesn't hit particularly low to the ground, and as a response you would meaty with an attack that has a low hurt box, meaning the reversal would whiff over your head, allowing for a full punish. Good stuff. Another slightly stranger case of hurtbox manipulation can be found in Breaker's Revenge. Saizo's stand B moves his hurtbox hilariously far forward, and because of this, when done as a point blank meaty, reversals will actually go behind him and whiff, which is just perfect. Sometimes just the intended qualities of a move alone give it exceptional uses as a meaty. Being a Rose player and doing a meaty throw invulnerable close medium kick to a Zangief you can just sense is churning their stick for a 720 will always make me laugh. Or picking King in Street Fighter Cross Tekken and locking the opponent down with a meaty shoulder tackle that also has armor and getting his full knee juggle combo when they don't realise you're baiting. It couldn't feel any better. In Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Zangief could do a meaty light punch, and because that move has literally no recovery, if you did it late enough and they did a reversal, by the time it came out you could block and kill them. A concept we see intentionally put into Street Fighter 5 with some characters having very slow invulnerable moves that you can safely meaty against, such as Ed's EX upper. And that last bit there is important. Meaties are another piece of emergent gameplay that players have honed over the years, which is always a beautiful thing to see, and now the developers acknowledge it and play around with it as a core concept to their games. Moves specifically being designed to be vulnerable or effective versus this tech plays a key role in balancing the games we love so much. You can't really remove this strategy. It's always going to exist in some form or another, and seeing people push it to its absolute limits will never fail to excite me. These small forms of expression and understandable complexity are the driving force to keep games deep and nuanced, so seeing them being properly respected by the people who design these titles is such a welcome nod to all the tech monsters out there.